You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Angela and Martin.
Let's look at today's front pages now.
And we start with The Observer, which is leading with Johnson is threatening Sunak's bid to end the deadlock over Brexit.
Once again, Boris is back. The Independent's front page. The sick children left to suffer as wait for care on the NHS soars.
While The Sun on Sunday goes with Andrew evicted from £30 million mansion.
Yeah, you can hear the smallest violins in the world in the background there, while the Daily Star reports on the rise of alien-related work absences. Now, there's one to conjure with.
Isn't there just? Yes. Can't wait to see what that was all about. Time to go through the papers now, though, but joining us this morning is the deputy editor of Spiked magazine, Fraser Myers, and writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Candice, we're going to start with you. This is a story that does not go away. It keeps on giving, and it's Nicola Bulley, the amateur investigators now featured in The Sun on Sunday, and what they're up to.
Yeah, so I found this so interesting. So this was on The Sun on Sunday, and it's people in the area which she's from in Lancashire angry at TikTokers who've descended onto the area and have filmed themselves supposedly looking for Nicola digging in the woods. And what's so interesting to me is that obviously people are so into true crime these days. There's huge interest on the internet in true crime, and that's why there's been so much interest in the Nicola Bulley story. Some members of the public genuinely want to help. But this is questionable to me. I mean, they're not going to be advancing the investigation in any way.Ey're not going to find her. I know people have lost faith in the police, but there's something wrong about that, I think.
And I wonder if part of the preponderance of these sleuths, these YouTubers, a couple of whom have been arrested to descend on the area, Fraser, is why the police threw out perhaps too much information about Nicola's background, struggles with alcoholism, and indeed the menopause.
I think the police have failed at every turn. I mean, they've been putting out information that have been, the police have been engaged in a kind of open speculation. They sound like amateur sleuths. Oh, could it be her menopause? Oh, did she fall in a river? Or,
it's been a PR disaster.
It's been a complete disaster. They haven't produced a shred of evidence that could actually lead us to somewhere to finding her. So, although I think it's pretty deplorable people doing things that could potentially tamper with evidence, especially if they're digging things up, it's awful. I do understand people's frustration because the police are not doing their job.
Except that I think we've heard more than one person say that any forensic evidence that might have remained has now probably been destroyed forever, and that again has actually hampered the police.
And that's a real problem. But also, I mean, the fact that she's been gone missing for as long as she has now, the likelihood of her being found is so slim.
Now, Candice, if I may assume you're a woman, it is 2023 after all.
Dare you?
Yeah, although you did admit earlier in the show to being a mother, so you can't shoot me down for that.
Yeah.
How does it make you feel about the police releasing evidence? I think that the internet's forever, and her poor children, whatever happens...
Different story.
To Nicola. No, it's not. About Nicola Bulley.
Oh, about
Nicola Bulley. I want to say on that because that information is forever, and I think it's another erosion of kind of women's rights and their kind of their body is just being used as a news story.
Yes, because the police never quite connected the two, right? So they said she had problems with alcohol, she'd been struggling with the menopause, but they didn't say, well, she was drunk and she fell in the river, or she was having some sort of personal crisis and maybe she harmed herself. Yeah. They sort of just put it out there and insinuated something, which I think is hugely damaging.
Yeah, and they didn't apparently clear it with the family beforehand. Which is pretty awful. My apologies, Martin. It's just that I saw a trans kid clinic round. I thought that's the story you were going on to, which is the one that Fraser wants to talk about.
Yeah, so it turns out that children in the United Kingdom are still being prescribed puberty-blocking drugs. This is despite the fact that there isn't really any clinical evidence to say that they're doing any good. Quite the opposite. In fact, the Tavistock, the Tavistock Clinic, which is where the UK's sort of specialist gender ID clinic, which is due to be closed this summer, they actually did their own little investigation into this. They said publicly it had gone really well. They buried the evidence. In fact, what it showed was that it wasn't helping children with gender dysphoria. It was, in many cases, it was making it worse. It was making people feel even more alienated from their bodies. And yet this drug is still being prescribed to children. Interestingly, so the drug is called Lupron. It's prescribed off-label, so it's given to people for people who have prostate cancer. That's kind of its main medical use. Its other use is what they give to sex offenders.
So it's a testosterone blocker.
It's a testosterone suppressant, and it's what they give. They give the same dose to children to block their puberty as they give to sex offenders when they want to chemically castrate them. That's pretty dark. I think that's a big scandal. People within the Tavistock have said that this, the medicalisation of children, particularly many of them gay, many of them autistic, they've said it's a scandal on a par with the East German doping of athletes, and I think it is, at that level. There seems to be this kind of ideological aversion to really saying, actually, do we know anything about this drug? What are the harms? What are the side effects? Because, if you speak out against that, then you're seen as being anti-trans or being transphobic.
I wonder if, Candice, bringing you into this one, I wonder if we are seeing a turning point, an awakening about this sort of, because Tavistock now is in full glare. The Times and the Sunday Times, credit to them, they've led this campaign of shining sunlight on as the best form of bleach to expose us. We're now seeing that sturgeon's been brought down. We covered this earlier in Scotland. Is there signs of hope that common sense might be taking over? Or are we still stuck in the mire?
I think common sense is taking over, and I'm glad that scrutiny is being applied to this. They should not be prescribing this to children. After the Cass review, she categorically said, we do not know the long-term effects of this medicine and what it's doing. It needs to stop now until further research is carried out.
Yeah. Well, to a story now that you've picked out from the Sunday Times that we were actually just sort of headlining just now when we were talking to Stephanie Tecci about the ruining of Roald Dahl's stories. What are they doing to them?
No, this is. I think this makes people angry because Roald Dahl is such a beloved author. This was a story in the Sunday Times.
Great headline.
Yes, Charlie and the Censorship Factory, because it really, really is, right? So they're bringing in these so-called sensitivity readers to figure out what parts of Roald Dahl could be offensive and changing the language. But I think you said earlier, they're not just changing the language, it's changing the story.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, so the witches, for instance, there's a piece in there that defends women who might wear wigs. When we all know in the witches, like, a big part of it is that they're bald, right? And they're so scary. And what is that teaching kids? That you can't question adults? That you can't make fun of mean adults?
Should we read what it says?
Yes.
The original edition, or the 2001 edition, don't be foolish, my grandmother said. You can't go around pulling the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just try it and see what happens. 2022, it says...
Don't be foolish, my grandmother said. Besides, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there is certainly nothing wrong with that.
It's a different story.
It is a different story.
Augustus Gloop is no longer fat as well.
No.
And Miss Truncheon is no longer referred to as female. What's funny is that Roald Dahl is known to be an anti-Semite, but there's nothing racist in his books. And normally a lot of these controversies, used to, 10 years ago, you'd have a row and there'd be some hangover of racist language in a children's book, and I would defend, keeping with the original. But you'd see that there was a kind of a legitimate complaint. Do we want to give, is this language appropriate for children? Here, there's none of that. It's words like double chin are being censored, words like fat. Who do these sort of sensitivity readers think they are?
Very sensitive individuals.
They're very, very sensitive. Much more sensitive than the general public. They're much more sensitive than children, because children love these books.
I know.
Yeah, and we should read these sensitivity readers, the Riot Act, and just clear them out. What's wrong with being politically incorrect? And then you can have a chat with your kids. Well, actually, is it not appropriate? My son got into trouble at school for using a word. I'll say it. He used the word retarded because it was in a Google search he did about mental conditions around Down syndrome. That's an outmoded word.
Yeah.
He read it out in the classroom and he got in trouble for it, and he came in very upset. And I said, well, it is a word that's inappropriate, but we can learn from that and don't repeat mistakes. But you don't do that by censoring words out of existence. That's me on my soapbox once again. Sorry.
That's right. He's got one underneath.
It's really important to say that this is the death of literature.
Yeah.
If you're going to scrub all offensive remarks out of books, I mean, we're lucky, I suppose, that we can compare and contrast the original with this new horrible censored version. A lot of books, this is happening pre-publication. television. You know, we don't even get to see what is going on behind the scenes, what's being torn up, what's being censored. And, you know, as Ray Bradbury said, there's more than one way to burn a book, and there's a lot of people running around with lit matches, and this is a great example of that. It's really very scary.
Oh, yeah, just read the story, because I think it'll frighten the life out of you what they're
Now, there's one that's really close to my heart. We've got quick time for this. It's in the Sunday Telegraph. There's a rebellion over Sadiq Khan's expansion of the ULEZ £12.50 a day to drive scheme. The Tories are on the warpath. What's happening, Fraser?
So, number 10 is considering blocking the expansion of it, because it's at the moment it only applies to central London, and it's going to apply to sort of...
There are other cities in Britain where they're doing something very similar.
But Sadiq Khan wants to expand it to outer London.
Correct.
Which is pretty outrageous. I mean, I live in Zone 2, so I'm not really affected by it. I can get public transport. But, you know, if you live in outer London, there's not really many public transport options. What if you have a trade? You know, and also, shouldn't people just have the right to drive? Isn't that a normal thing?
With people, what ULEZ is to those people who don't understand.
Okay, so people don't know. It's the ultra-low emission zone, and it means that you'll face a charge every day if you drive in that zone, which is basically going to be the whole of Greater London. If your car is basically too old and therefore not eco-friendly enough.
It's £12.50.
And it's £12.50 a go. And it's people with older cars are poorer. There's people who can't afford to pay this charge.
And the specific case they may have, which I think is a great line of attack, is that because it's now expanded to all of London, there's a £5 charge to come in from outside of London. So the mayor has overreached his powers and he's going out of London, and I think they've got a good case. And anyway, it'd be a great fight to watch in the courts, won't it?
Definitely, it's got to be hit back, this.
Yeah, and he just wants to make lots of money out of motorists so that he can pay off the deficit for all the money that he's wasted on London transport.
Okay, good. Well, thank you
That's
once again, Candice and Fraser. A tremendously lively part of the show. And let's